Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like it's just one bombshell after another, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to the Psych Legal Pop Podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about popular culture through the lens of an attorney and a therapist. I'm Brooke Brigham, I'm the attorney.
And I'm Tess Brigham, I'm the therapist.
Today we are talking about a documentary that just came out on Hulu. It's called Mastermind, To Think Like a Killer. Now, this is the story of someone you probably have never heard of before. I'd never heard of her, but she is absolutely amazing. Her name is Dr. Ann Burgess. So I'm going to just sort of give you a summary of what this is about, and we'll talk about the documentary. So Dr. Ann Burgess began her trailblazing career as a nurse in the 1950s and later became a psychiatric nurse and professor, working with victims of sexual assault at a time when people didn't even believe rape was a crime. Burgess is a doctorally prepared, board-certified psychiatric clinical nurse specialist. She pioneered assessing and treating trauma in rape victims. She co-founded one of the first hospital-based crisis counseling programs at Boston City Hospital with Boston College sociologist Linda Little Holstrom. Together, she and Holstrom conducted extensive research regarding 1960s rape victims in Boston, interviewing more than 100 victims of sexual trauma, and figuring out that sexual violence is more about control than sex, a truly novel revelation back then. Her groundbreaking work with victims of sexual abuse and trauma caught the attention of the FBI, which had recently begun investigating serial offenders, including rapists and murderers. She interviewed victims and quantified their experiences. She began to consult for John Douglas, Robert Ressler, and other FBI agents in the Behavioral Science Unit to develop modern psychological profiling for serial killers. The BSU was interested in doing similar research to Burgess, except with perpetrators rather than victims. Burgess was granted access to the early cassette tapes that were recorded during the first serial killer interviews, such as discussions with Edmund Kemper, Ted Bundy, and Charles Manson. At first, she questioned working with the FBI as she had 4 young children and knew it would take up time from her family. However, the importance of the work is what made her agree. Her focus was on the victims. Through interviews and finding patterns among the serial killers, her team was the first to find similar trauma among serial killers. Dr. Burgess developed the methodology that FBI agents now use to interview, study, and profile serial killers, and even apprehend perpetrators before they could offend again. She created a scientific method to make profiling credible by studying the history and activities of 36 serial killers. She's been called a pathfinder and has largely been an unsung hero until now. But her career isn't finished. These days, you can find Dr. Burgess teaching at Boston College's Connell School of Nursing and serving as an expert witness for cases involving sexual violence. She testified for the defense in the first trial of Eric Menendez, which ended in a mistrial. She wrote a book, A Killer by Design, with Steve Constantine, who also appears in the documentary.
All right. Well, what are your thoughts, high level?
High level. Well, first of all, I can't believe I never heard of this woman.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that in the 50s and 60s, she was doing this groundbreaking work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just now finding out about
Yes.
it. It really goes to show you like what women can do.
Yeah. If you give us a chance.
If you give us a chance. Jeez.
One theme that we've seen since doing this podcast is men fuck up a bunch of stuff. Then a woman has to come in and be like, what the fuck are you doing? We got to do this differently. Or this isn't the way to go. Or I don't know, I'm going to believe this person. And then she comes in, right? We saw it with American Nightmare, with the cop that solved it. Every time there's some woman right there going, hold on a second.
Well, it shows you how differently men and women think.
Yes.
All these male FBI agents are focused on something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes in and she's like, well, wait a minute. People are, people are different from each other. People are complex, but the type of pathology that drives people to do this is very similar. And so let's try to figure out what that pathology is. And let's try to know people better. That kind of delving into human behavior and delving into people's pasts and their trauma and all that kind of stuff. It's a very female thing, wanting to really know what this person is about and not just focusing on, we have to try to catch this killer. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you do, but how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
If you don't try to get inside the mind. So anyway, I mean, it's revolutionary, and a lot of these men took credit for it.
Oh, yes, they did. They took a lot of credit for it.
And they didn't even let her in the picture.
I know.
They took a picture of all this FBI team behavioral
unit. Yeah, this groundbreaking unit that's doing all this great stuff. And she's not even in the photo.
They didn't even invite her to be in the photo.
Yeah. They didn't even think, maybe we should give Anne a call. Or I bet you anything, Anne was probably there that day and, working down in the basement, working. And the other part of this too is that she also had, she was also raising 4 children, and she obviously had a very supportive husband, but it was interesting to hear how, she would burn a lot of dinners because she was working. She'd get distracted. And it's like, okay, and no one else can cook. She's responsible for cooking all these meals.
Right.
And I think that's another level of parenthood and how it affects women versus men, which is, I often talk about this, which is, when Steve and I had Max, he just kind of, he kept going on with his career, his life. Now he has a child, and now his career did not miss a beat. But for me, it derailed things. It's not terrible, but it slowed it down. And that's this big thing with women is we're constantly having to, men can have it all, but we can't. And the only way for us to have it all is to do it perfectly all the time, or we're going to be criticized. And I thought it was just interesting how this idea of her having all these kids, that she was still responsible for getting them up in the morning, flying down to Quantico. It just seemed like, wow, okay.
Yeah. And her kids are, they're adults, obviously. They're in the documentary, and they're obviously very proud of her and speak very highly of her. So she did it all.
Yeah.
She managed to, raise her children, have a good relationship with them, and do all this amazing work. Yeah. So I forget what state she lived in, but
she's in Boston, Massachusetts.
In Boston. Okay. So she would fly. Her husband is a pilot.
Yeah.
And so he would fly her. And I think she eventually got a pilot's license.
Yeah. Learning to fly in between catching serial killers and raising children and making dinner. She's flying.
They would fly down to Quantico, Virginia, with the FBI training headquarters, whatever it is there. And and so she had 2 jobs. She
had 90 jobs.
Yeah. She was still working in Boston and, doing this. So I don't know, I'm in awe of this woman.
Yeah.
She's like my new hero. She's just great.
Yeah. She's she's amazing. And I think what's made her so successful is she knew there was misogyny. She knew she was being treated a certain way. She knew she had a lot to prove to people, but she really didn't get too caught up in any of that. Like when she wasn't asked to be in the picture, the infamous magazine picture, I think other people were really pissed, but she, I think, was just like, I'm just going to keep my head down and I got to keep going. I got to keep going. I got to keep going. I got to, that she never did any of this she didn't do this so she could get a Hulu special about her. She's been doing this but I think some of those other men in the FBI might be doing, I think their motivations were really different. So she wanted to do this because she felt it was important. She felt like she had to. And
her focus was on the victims always, on what she was doing for rape victims in the hospital, and then later what she was doing for, the victims of these serial killers, and trying to prevent more victims, people
and children
victims.
And children, because she also, and we see tapes of this, of her talking to a little girl who was almost kidnapped, and like she wasn't speaking, and Dr. Burgess got her to speak because she didn't go in there hard charging, like, tell me what you know, little girl. Like, she went in there with a different perspective. So it's a 3-part documentary, and each part sort of takes us through a period of her, a period of her life. And, we learned very young that she was obviously in the beginnings that she was very bright, that she, at the time, which we know from our mother, right, which is women only didn't have that many choices in terms of what they could go into. You could be a nurse, you could be a teacher, you could be a secretary. And so she picked nurse. And she was very interested in wanting to know, right, how people cope, how do people feel, what it's like for you, what are you thinking, what are you feeling? And she said nobody, when she started nursing, the doctors weren't interested in that. No one was really interested in that. She thought that she could, she got into nursing because she was cared about people. But she was like, oh, but no one's ever stopping and really talking to anybody. No one's really asking them what it's like. How do you feel? Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, all of those other things. And that's when she started interviewing rape victims, which is hard to believe. It's always shocking when they show us those old school videos from, the 50s, 60s, 70s, where we get like a young woman outside, like wearing like shorts and a tank top. And we get the guys, see, this lady look at her, look at this way she's dressed. She's asking for it because she's wearing shorts on a hot day.
It wasn't even that long ago. They showed a clip. This must have been from the 80s or 90s. What was that show? Not Jerry Springer.
No. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. The guy who used to smoke.
Morty. I don't know. One of these like Jerry Springer type talk shows. Something Morton. I don't know. Yeah. And he's got these guys on his show saying, well, if you start and once you start, if she says stop, it's like, no, I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep doing it. I mean, just like, oh my God, this was not that long ago. So yeah, that's what we're working with.
Yeah. Morton Downey Jr.
Morton Downey Jr.
That's who it was. Yes. And he had a late night show and he would smoke. So this was, I think the late 80s, early 90s. And yeah. No, sometimes it's from the 60s, 70s. Sometimes it's more recent.
Last week. Yeah.
And the issue was that up until the time that she started interviewing women was that all of the research and all of the ideas about rape and why people rape and the victims and how it all works was all misinformation because no one had ever stopped to talk to anybody.
No one studied it.
No one ever looked at it because it, quote unquote, there was a time in our country where it wasn't seen as a problem because we know that women are primarily sexually abused more than men, but we're seeing more and more that this is coming to light, that that's not necessarily the truth. But that it was seen as, sex sex feels good. So therefore, how could you, how could you not want it? Or
Yeah, who was it? The person who said you might as well sit back and enjoy it.
God.
No, I'm serious.
I think
said
it was
that.
someone from the FBI.
It was a politician, or
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
I believe it was like one of those horrible politicians from the 60s or 70s. Yeah, I don't know. Somebody really did say that, though. Probably more than one person has publicly said that. But
yes,
that's that happened. And then the women's movement came along, and the women were demanding rights and to be treated as such. And part of that was that they wanted these men convicted of these things.
Mhm.
They wanted men to be arrested and charged with rape when it was a rape. And there was a lot of pressure on the FBI at the time because of that, because they had so many unsolved rapes.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know how to find these people.
Well, and they weren't. They would get an unsolved rape, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, we don't know how to do this, so we just put it on the shelf, or
put it in the file.
Oh, it's a rape, it's not a murder, so let's just put it over here, right? Let's plop it down on right there."
And it was only because of public pressure from the women's movement that they said, "Oh shit, we got to start actually taking this seriously." And that's when they contacted Dr. Burgess.
Well, but it was that, plus it was in 1981, there was this ski mask rapist who was terrorizing a community. And I think that there was a lot of public pressure of like, hello, you're the FBI. Aren't you guys the cowboys that come in and fix things? And we have this massive problem and you guys can't seem to figure this out. And I think it was that they were like, oh, okay, maybe we should do something about this. So she originally, in 1978, she was professor of nursing at Boston College, and she wrote a book called Rape, Victims of Rape. And she started off by publishing a study, basically debunking all these myths of like, rape isn't a problem, don't bother. And then in 1981, she gets a phone call from someone from the FBI asking her to come down there, and can we talk to you? We need help. And so she talks about the first time she went to the FBI, and she was trying to present to this whole room full of men her findings and what she had learned. And that was unbelievable. Like the men they were checked out. They didn't care. They were asking her, well, have you ever been raped? I mean, excuse me?
Yeah.
That's a helpful question? And it's this idea of, oh, this woman's getting on a soapbox about this, or, she cares a lot about this because this happened to her or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like, you can care about things and you can be pissed about things that haven't happened to you. But she really got them. She got them to understand that rape isn't about sex. And once they understood the severity of it, they could start to accept what she had to say. And they had this behavioral science unit, which was, I guess, in the basement of the FBI that was kind of considered the BS unit. It wasn't very well respected. And she said, well, I was a bit of an outsider and a bit of a, someone that wasn't part of the cool kids. So I ended up, and that's how the behavioral unit was seen too. Mm-hmm. So that's where she ended up. And that's where she met John Douglas and Rob Ressler. And you didn't watch the, I think, was it HBO or I think it was Netflix? Mindhunter. No. That show. So there was a show called it was really good. It was David Fincher, and it was based on this. So there was a character that was John Douglas, there was a character that was Rob Ressler, and then there was Anna Torv. She played this woman that was based on Dr. Burgess. And about how groundbreaking their work was, because there was a real problem in the 1970s with serial killers, and Douglas and Ressler started interviewing the, as you mentioned in the beginning, Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, Edmund Kemper, to try to understand, why they did the things that they did. But the problem was they didn't know how to make sense of anything that they were doing. And here comes Anne to help them make sense of it.
Yeah, because they don't have any skills in research, compiling data, coming up with a methodology. So that's what she had to teach them. You take all these you look for the similarities in these killers, in their backgrounds, and in the things that they do. And you come up with kind of like, a checklist of, warning signs and how the similarities to help you profile a person. Because prior to that, she said profiling was kind of like an art. You just kind of winged it and you just did it.
Yeah.
And so she helped them develop a system to use actual data that they got from all of these serial killer interviews and compiled it and said, okay, now you go out and you look for these kinds of people. These are going to be your killers and rapists, and instead of just going on a hunch.
Yeah. Well, and also the other part of it too is being able to, I mean, this came a little bit later, but the victimology, like being able to look at someone's victims and see what are the similarities with these two people or these three people or four or five. And what would happen is they would start to develop and see like, oh, okay, that's right. There was never forced entry, or there wasn't, it seemed like people were going with this person free will. Okay. So maybe that probably means it's someone they know. So who do they all have in common, or what are the things? Like they weren't really doing that before. And she's the one that came in and helped them make sense of it. And they did a lot of this in secret for a long time. The FBI didn't even quite know, because they were all down in the basement, exactly what they were going to do. So, but Anne is really credited with developing the tools that would be helpful to help the FBI stop this. And it was the ski mask rapist in South Louisiana that started a lot of it. And what they found was that the rapes were escalating. He was getting bolder and braver. And this person sounded a lot like what was happening with this rapist, sounded like someone else that they had captured before and interviewed, Monty Russell. And so they were able to start seeing these parallels between what Monty Russell was talking about. And it was almost kind of like what they found with serial killers. It was like an addiction.
Yeah.
Right. You
start out with just a little bit, you dabble, and then it gets more, and then it gets more, and then it gets more, and it just escalates.
Yeah. We saw that with the Golden State Killer. We saw that, right, where it's like peeping Tom, and then peeping Tom to the flasher, to the this, to the that, that kind of thing, that it becomes upping the ante.
Yeah. Another big revelation, well, this was kind of a sub part of the research, was that they also figured out patterns of trauma in the killers and the rapists. They all had the same kind of patterns. Like they were abused.
Yes.
They were traumatized, and there was a certain formula. And it was, a lot of times they said, it was usually like a absent father and then a really abusive mother. And that's where the misogyny comes from. The mother abuses the son, and then the son, acts that's kind of like the point of origin. And then when they get near puberty, and that's when they start everything starts to shift in the brain, and then they start doing these little things, killing animals or, whatever. And there's just, this is the first time this has actually been researched and presented.
Yeah. Well, with the ski mask rapist, what she interviewed, so she was not allowed to go with them to interview the serial killers, but she interviewed all the victims, because guess what? No one had really done that. And what she found was this pattern that he only picked wealthy women. And they started to be able to see that he had, and so they start to develop this profile of him, so they were able to say, okay, this is a man, late 20s, early 30s, he sees himself as an alpha male, right? He moved around a lot, and, what's going on, but he likes nice things. And they were able to say that they believe that he would be driving a flashy car. And between that and the sketch that they had was how they were able to capture him. Because it was like someone saw him on the street, like saw him driving. So she got that, and she said they learned some really important things from that. The first one is they learned that a lot of these serial, I cannot say serial today, that they had a signature. They had something that they were going after. So for this guy, the ski mask rapist, for him, he wanted another witness present. So that for him was part of it. You know, for some, it's about being able to see someone, the fear in their eyes, you know, that's what they're waiting for. And the other thing was that a lot of these people, they really kind of know how to play with the police. That there was this suddenly with all these serial killers coming about, they started to want to, you know, they wanted to be famous almost, right? Yeah. Like with the Zodiac killer and all the things that we're seeing. So
yeah, that was a trend too. Like they wanted to get caught at a certain point because they wanted to be famous. And I don't remember the name of the guy, but the guy he was the Boy Scout
leader, yeah,
and then he looked like just this young kid,
John Jobert,
yeah. And he, you know, he got the death penalty, and they were asking him, well, there was an interviewer there asking him, well, how did you feel when you heard that death penalty sentence? And he's like, I was expecting it. I mean, he was like so nonchalant about it. It was kind of like, well, this is, you know, I got here. This was my path.
Yeah,
it's really weird. It's almost like they're going to go out in a blaze of glory, and they know that they're going to probably be put to death or spend their life in prison, but they put themselves there. They put themselves on this trajectory.
Yeah.
Almost on purpose, it feels like.
Well, it was really interesting because they played a clip from one of the interviews with Charles Manson, which I'm not like, I've never been a huge Charles Manson, like fascinated and helter skelter and all that. That hasn't been my interest, but it was interesting to hear him say that he was beaten so badly by his father that it changed how he saw pain. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So yes, it's these elements of being either having a father figure that's gone or having a father that's violent. And so this is what you see for the male in your life. And then you either have a mom who is really weak in a lot of ways or really overbearing in a lot of ways. But I just thought that was interesting what Charles Manson was saying about, like, yeah, you stop, you know, if you grow up with such pain changes for
right.
you.
What is it like? This is nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, because, you know, I would say that the majority of these people do have horrific abusive backgrounds, but then there's always some who don't, like Jeffrey Dahmer. You know, his parents were a little weird, but they weren't. I don't think I saw some of. I tried to watch some that Dahmer movie.
Yeah, I didn't.
It was pretty bad, but like from what I could tell, his parents weren't abusive like that. There was some other issues like with abandonment and divorce.
But
and stuff.
see, I think that's the other thing too is you can have parents maybe from the outside that look like, oh, well, he was fed and clothed and he went to school and
they didn't beat him.
And they didn't beat him. But I think there's a lot of parents that do shit that is, maybe they're aware of it or not, but there's a lot of parents that are just cold.
Right.
Like cold. Like I remember I was chatting with this guy. This was when I worked in drug and alcohol treatment. And he said to me, he was from a large family of like 10, 11 kids. But he said, I don't think my father's ever talked to me. Like my father, I don't think he's ever had a conversation with me. I don't think he's ever talked to me. He basically felt like he was invisible to this person. And that can be enough to kind of put you on a path. So I think that it's this, I think to create the serial killer or to create this, like there has to be several things in place in perfect storm. And I think part of that perfect storm is maybe having these parents, right? Parents that maybe weren't loving, were absent emotionally, even though they were physically there, coupled with maybe not having other things happen. I think people who meet a teacher or a mentor or someone who comes into their life at the right time and cares for them, I think that can change people's trajectory. But I think that if you don't have that, then that's all it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It could be just the complete absence of any kind of love or caring or attention. Because then, you're going to go seek attention somehow.
Yeah. And so then you act out in some way, you hurt an animal in some way, and that felt exciting.
It's
or
like a
controlling.
rush. Yeah.
Because what Ann Burgess found was that for a lot of these men, it was that they were in these situations where they felt no control, right? Out of control. And so now it's almost like if I continue to be abusive and continue to act out in these ways, they take the abuse that they have and they act it out. And so instead of it being this horrendous thing that happened to them that they have to deal with, it becomes a fantasy. And then the fantasy becomes part of the, right? And so they're like, oh, but I'm, this is my fantasy. And it was really interesting. And
Yeah. And then the case, I don't know, this might be jumping ahead, but.
No. Well, so you mentioned that was the 1983 Nebraska case when a 13-year-old boy his body was found in a field. And they put together a profile that was, not quite there, but she was the one. And then 11 weeks later, another boy goes missing, and she says, they needed help with the methodology. So she started looking at the two boys and going, okay, these two boys are both kind of, they're kind of small, they're smaller for their age. And, it doesn't look like they saw, one of the boys that was killed out in the middle of the woods somewhere. They saw two sets of tracks walking in and one set of tracks walking out. And she was like able to go, oh, so he couldn't carry the kid there. The kid walked on their own. So so that means that this person isn't as strong to carry this kind of kid. So why is that? And the fact that he was a Boy Scout leader, they knew him. So, because the boys went with him willingly.
Yeah. That was a real creepy. Yeah. And he was kind of a smaller person. Man.
I mean, he looked like he was 5 years old. I mean, he was a child. How old? I don't even know how old he was when they caught him. 15, 16, something like that. I mean, he was, and he had a very traumatic childhood because he would witness his mother being strangled by his father. So here we go. So Anne realizes that many of these serial killers had traumatic childhoods, and they would want to erase the trauma by turning it into a fantasy. And that's, So now they are in control of the situation. They are the offender. They're the one that's controlling everything.
Oh, that's just so weird how the mind works.
Yeah. So, and then that's one so it was the fact that she, this was working. And it was working well. And so now the FBI suddenly was like, oh, we're going to put a lot of time and attention. That they're not in the basement anymore. And that was when the big magazine article came out. Without Anne's picture at all on there.
Yeah. So what about the case that the two little girls, Melissa and Opal?
So this was 1985 in Illinois. Two girls, Melissa and Opal, were kidnapped. They were both 7.
Well, one
was 7, one was 8. Opal was 8.
Opal was escaped the kidnapping.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but she wasn't talking. And they needed her to talk, they needed information from her. And of course, Anne, being who she was, realized that this girl was traumatized, that she was scared, that it was, she went through this horrible thing. And we hear and we see all the tapes of her, going through and helping her, this little girl, draw, show me in a drawing, art therapy. Yeah. And she helped her draw what was going on and got Opal to trust her.
Yeah. She would ask her well, draw what the car looks like. And she'd, draw this car. And then she'd say, okay, well, what kind of car was that? And she started opening up and she's like, well, it looks like a Pinto, but it's not really a Pinto. I mean, she really started opening up, just drawing the picture. And then Anne would ask her, to draw different things and then even just write words, how do you feel? And she then, fast forward to the end of the documentary, she did the same thing with Eric Menendez.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't like, even though he was much older, he couldn't really like look her in the eye and tell her what his father had done to him.
Yeah.
And so she did the exact same thing, and they showed it. It's all videotaped. And, you know, he's drawing things. He's drawing like pictures of the bedroom and like pictures of these sort of stick figures of him and his father and things that his father's saying to him. He's writing it down. And that was amazing.
Yeah. Well, and also she was like, I noticed that all of these scenes, there's always a bed or a bedroom. So, well, what else would happen in the bedroom? And that's when he started drawing the abuse. And that's, you know, that's a lot of things. Like, that's why, you know, when you have teenagers and you need to talk to them about something, that it's good to do it. They always recommend doing it in the car. Because you're both facing this way. And when I used to work with teens, you know, sometimes it depends on the teen's age, but like, you know, usually a lot of people just sitting across from you doesn't work, especially with boys. So you kind of need to go out and walk around and do things and kind of ask questions as you're going along, so that they can be doing something, but also they don't have to look at you.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
It's very effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Psych Legal Pop will be back after these messages. Hey there, it's Tess Brigham, the therapist half of Psych Legal Pop. In addition to being a therapist, I'm also a coach, speaker, and author. And if you go to my website, you'll find courses, ebooks, and worksheets for sale. If you're feeling a bit lost, overwhelmed by life's twists and turns, or you're just simply stuck, I've got you covered. Head over to my website, www.tessbrigham.com, for courses, ebooks, and worksheets tailored to help you unlock your true potential. From relationship struggles to career transitions, I'm here to guide you every step of the way. So stop looking outside of yourself at friends, family, social media for the answers. The answers to all your questions are inside of you. My products and services are the first step in uncovering your true you.
Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like, it's just one bombshell after another, you know, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.
So yeah, we get into, Opal's testimony, what Opal had to say, helped them capture the killer, Brian Dugan, because Melissa's body was found 5 days later. And, you know, then she escaped him and she helped find this guy. And then, in the late 80s, there's this new breed of serial killers. I don't know why I can't say this word. They're more sophisticated. They're sending their info to the media. And they're not killing for the same reasons. So she wanted to advance the tool. She wanted to, and profiling was she said we were a small group of people. We couldn't handle all of the cases. She's like, so it can't just be one group of people doing it, 3 people or 4 people. We have to train and get profilers in every single state and every single jurisdiction. And but she and Kess Ressler and Douglas, they wrote a book called Sexual Homicide, Patterns and Motives. So, yeah. And so then Douglas and Ressler, they actually went in a different direction. They left and retired from the FBI. And I guess I didn't realize that one of them consulted on Silence of the Lambs, and that there was a character played by Scott Glenn. I guess he played the wrestler character. I guess he played wrestler, a version of wrestler.
Right.
So but she didn't want the attention. But she was asked to testify for the defense for the Menendez brothers, and she got a lot of flack.
Yeah.
From her FBI. They all said, what are you doing? You're ruining it. What do he's a bad guy. It's this. And again, I think this is still this thing with this is why women, I think it's why we're able to multitask a lot better than men. It's why we're able to, we can see much more these shades of gray and an understanding of humanity, of people, of why would, okay, well, let's figure out why these two young men would kill their father.
Yeah, let's not reject
and mother.
Yeah, because they were mocking this whole abuse excuse thing. It's like, well,
that was awful.
But yeah, it's like they jumped to conclusions. Can we at least examine this? Instead of just dismissing this outright. And she explained that, she talked about the methodology of male sexuality. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to, it kind of crosses over with the rape thing. It's like men can't understand. It's almost like with men, any kind of sex, it should be just fine because, it's pleasurable. Even if it's two men, okay, well, shouldn't be that bad. And
even if it's your father and you're 8.
It's your father, exactly. It's like, how far are we going to take this?
Yeah.
But it was almost like that's how far they were taking it. It wasn't understood. Incest, this kind of child abuse, all these kind of things still, even though the Menendez case is 30 years ago, people were still, especially, law enforcement, they didn't understand this.
Yeah.
They couldn't fathom any of these concepts. And she could. She never thought that it had anything to do with money. And, she believed them. And when nobody else would.
Yeah.
Except for the jury. I mean,
half the jury of the first trial.
The first trial, all the women, it was split. Yeah. It was split. And that's, again, it was split down gender lines. All the men wanted murder. All the women jurors wanted manslaughter. And, this is so sad. This case, if anyone's interested, we did a couple of episodes on this. So it was episode 56 was about the Menendez murder trial, and then episode 58 was the documentary that came out last year, Menendez and Menudo, where we now have other people coming forward. The people who were involved with the band Menudo, who Jose Menendez was obsessed with, and he was abusing them too.
Yes, he was abusing. A lot of people, and not just his sons.
Right. And this case is going places. Mark Garagos has taken on their case. We're going to try to do a habeas corpus petition based upon this this documentary, and the people in the documentary have come forward to cooperate and say, he was doing this to us too. So
Yeah, those two, I mean, the brothers, and we talked about this, I don't know if it was Lyle or Eric, basically said, once they were in jail, it was the most freedom he ever felt in his life.
He felt relieved.
He felt relieved. He was happy, being in jail. That was a happy place, even though there was violence and all these other things happening around him. He's like, this is much better. And that the fact that these two are still in prison today just bothers me to no end. And every time I see Gypsy Blanchard, and I'm not saying I think Gypsy should be, locked away. I'm glad that she's out. I'm glad that she's able to have a life, and that she's, pregnant, and she's building a life for herself. I think she's, I think she's got a lot to learn, but and grow. And she's got a lot to work out and grow in many ways. But these boys deserve to get out. I'm sorry, but if she's out there, they should be out. It's the same situation. Yes. Is it okay to murder someone? No. But if you're a child that you've been abused for year after year after year, you feel like you have no choice. And I don't know. I could just go on and on. It just bugs me that these two are still in prison. At least they're together.
Finally. Yeah. Remember, there's a scene here where they're doing an interview with Barbara Walters, and they say, it's right after they've been convicted in the second trial where they allowed no evidence of abuse, which that fucking judge, that judge who banned
just
the abuse
F
stuff.
them.
I was just reading something about, there was some other bad stuff that he did in some
Do you know his name?
cases.
So we can blast it and tell the world he's bad.
Let's see. I thought I wrote it down.
Well, and I think the other thing with the abuse excuse that, which they were talking about, I think the other piece with the Menendez is, I think it also highlighted the fact that this is not that there's molestation, incest, abuse in every single household. So even if you're in Beverly Hills, it can, it happens. And that but I think that's the thing. People saw that they had all this money, and it's like, shouldn't they be happy? Like,
they just wanted to kill to get
all their parents' money. And they spent a lot of money after their parents were gone. But these were young kids. They're finally free.
I know.
I don't know. I don't think they were doing anything too insane that would be.
Well, yeah. Look up the judge on the Menendez case. He did something awful in another case too. I'll have to look that up and we'll do an update about that.
Report back.
Yeah. But that interview with Barbara Walters, where they're basically saying, yeah, we might never see each other again. And they didn't see each other they were separated in separate prisons. They obviously can't visit each other. I guess they could write to each other.
Yeah, they would write to each other. They played chess. They played chess through the mail, and that's how they kept going. But that's another thing too, is just the way we punish people in our world. Like, just the fact that we just feel like we have to take away everyone's rights and be animals about everything and lock people in cages. It's like, you lock someone in a cage, they become an animal.
Right.
So I'm sorry. It's just, we have to treat each other better. We have to. We cannot, because if someone does something awful, doesn't mean that you two need to do something awful. God. So let's pray for the brothers to get out. They deserve to get out.
So, and
she also talked about this. She doesn't believe in life without parole. She was really heartbroken. But that spurred her to, she said, I need for people to understand sexual trauma. And she realized, like, I cannot hide in the shadows anymore. Even though I want to, I've got to get out there, and I've got to start speaking about this. And I've got to start, going, and we see her going on all these news shows talking about what she knows to get the word out, which is amazing.
Yeah. And then I thought it was interesting how she brought up, part of the education about trauma that she brought up had to do with Andrea Constad.
Yes.
Was the woman who Bill Cosby, she was a victim of Bill Cosby. Now, he had been victimizing women for decades.
We didn't know it at the time.
He would drug women and have sex with them while they were unconscious. And it happened to her. And so Dr. Burgess was talking about, how the body keeps the score, like that trauma registers in your body, even if you're unconscious when it happens.
Yeah.
And so they interview Andrea Constad, and she talks about, the origin of Me Too is all the fruits of Dr. Burgess' labor. And finally, culture is starting to believe victims. And that has a lot to do with all of her work and her advocacy, and and she's still doing it. She's still.
Well, because if you look at the Bill Cosby thing, right, it was this, because she brought this up in 2005, and the criminal case was denied, so she had a civil case, and then she settled with him out of court in 2006, but it took from 2006 until 17, 18 for all of the victims to come out.
Because it wasn't safe.
Yeah.
And also too, originally before the civil case with Andrea Constad, the Bill Cosby's lawyer made some sort of agreement with the district attorney
Mm-hmm.
not to prosecute. And so that was strange.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they had the civil case, and then his deposition in the civil case was great because he, gave him all this good information, whatever. So then many years go by. Now there's a new district attorney.
Mm-hmm.
That district attorney says, well, fuck this agreement. I'm going to prosecute him. It's not with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he prosecuted him and he was convicted.
Yes.
He did go to prison. But then on appeal, they said, oh, no, you have to honor that agreement. You promised way back then that you were not going to prosecute America's dad.
Yeah.
Let him go, And I mean, what? How can you make an agreement? Just one person, the district attorney, how can you make an agreement? Forget what the public thinks or protecting people or victims or anything. And that baffles my mind. So then, now he's out of prison.
Now he's out. But I will say, listen, I would prefer that he was in prison right now, like in eating shitty food and cold and sad. But I will say the fact that his legacy is gone.
Trashed.
Like Bill Cosby, you can see it from a mile away. The man has an ego larger than, Montana. It's like, and this kills him.
Mm-hmm.
That no one's rerunning his shows.
Mm-hmm.
No one's asking to honor him. He's not getting the Mark Twain Award.
Mm-hmm.
He's not that. He has been completely rejected. And to me, that feels like just stick him.
Yeah.
Just stick him where it hurts.
And he can't.
It's not enough, but
he can't really go anywhere. Everybody hates him. So he's kind of like a,
even his wife.
Yeah.
His wife really hates him.
She's just waiting around for him to die so she can
get away from him.
Yeah.
But you know what? She too, though, I will say I think she was complicit in a lot of this stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she wasn't coming forward. She wasn't, because I think she knew, I don't know if there's ever been proof, but I believe that she knew a lot more than what she ever said.
Oh, yeah. I think
so.
He was a scumbag.
But the work of Dr. Ann Burgess and all the work of educating people on rape and what happens. And, it was interesting to hear from Andrea because she was like, after all this happened, I couldn't work. I moved back in with my parents. Like, it was like her whole life fell apart and she didn't even understand, like, oh my God, I have PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is this is, it affects your entire life and everything. And so I thought that was interesting that she didn't even, like, back in 2005, we weren't even really talking about things like The Body Keeps the Score, which is a great book. Like, we weren't even talking about these things and how Dr. Ann Burgess has been planting seeds and seeds and seeds and seeds for 50 years? 60, I mean, however long she's been doing this and how important that is.
Yeah. Since the 60s. So
yeah.
60 years. Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, she created essentially the blueprint for how we profile people.
And that's the reason why serial killing has become not as prevalent. Because it works. They now are able to profile people and catch people, before they commit another offense and turn into serial killer. I mean, they'll kill once or maybe twice, but I don't know what the definition quite of a serial killer.
3. You have to murder at least 3 people.
3. So now they're catching people before they get to that number.
Yeah.
And she was saying this was from an interview with Katie Couric, but it says that, there's a shift now from serial killers to mass shooters, unfortunately. Like that's the new norm. And she says that, obviously mass shootings are more frightening because everyone can be a potential victim. If you're in a crowd at a movie theater or a store, and, as we record this yesterday, President Trump was shot at. Former President Trump, and another man was killed.
2 men were killed. 2 people were killed, and 1 person was injured.
So yeah, so that's now where she is actually focusing her attention. And actually she is working with her granddaughter.
Yes, the next generation of Burgess women.
Yeah.
To fight the good fight.
They're working on kind of the same kind of thing, trying to analyze the manifestos of these shooters and to see what they can learn about profiling. So they're using AI to go through all these manifestos and analyze them and then interpret the analysis and building a database. So that's kind of the new serial killer, I guess, is the mass shooter.
Yeah. Well, and she's also working with, so she's 87 now. She's still teaching at Boston College, which is insane. And she's doing that. And she's working with the next generation. And she also was working on missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is another thing that gets ignored. Big issue. Huge, and it's ignored.
Huge number.
So here she is, 87, and she's still got about 7 jobs. And she's still doing it all. She doesn't have to cook for 4 kids anymore. But
she's lightened her workload.
Yeah.
But, she also said in this interview, Couric asked her, what do you make with the cultural fascination with serial killers? And she said it could be because people want to be able to protect themselves and are wondering what they can learn. Then there's the armchair detective work where you hear of a case that isn't solved. People begin to talk about it. You watch other shows to get more information. And she says it's good to try to educate people because that's her reason. She's an academic. And, that these things can make people safer. And she talks about, women. Unfortunately, women do need to know these things. They do need to help. Help themselves. And like she was saying that when her husband is gone, I think she still does this kind of stuff. When her husband is gone, she puts like a pair of men's, work boots outside her door. So it looks like, a man is there. And then she said one of the best things you can do is get a German Shepherd.
Oh, oops. I got the wrong breed. My pugs are not going to protect me. But they definitely, I will say, the one thing when you have dogs is if someone gets anywhere near close to your house, they will tell you. So you do actually have a bit of warning. And it's interesting because the only times our dogs have ever barked at night is when like we would have a guest and the guest would get up and like disturb the house in some way, shape or form. And that's what triggered them. Yeah. So they do have uses, but you're right. German Shepherds probably are best.
Yeah. Because I guess they're very aggressive towards outsiders, which that's kind of a liability too.
Yes. But, Karen Reed.
Yeah.
Karen Reed case. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And this, the Karen Reed stuff, it's interesting because I saw this clip of when they announced that it was a hung jury and you look outside and there's all these people that are supporting Karen Reed. Did you notice it was like all women? I know Turtle Boy is a boy, but besides him, it women. Feels like, but I think, I don't know. I feel like this is, again, I think women have taken an interest in this case and this desire to see Karen Reed get justice because it's the same thing. We feel much like with OJ, we talked about that last week. We're pissed. Yeah. We're goddamn pissed. We're pissed about just the fact that this guy, this Proctor, has the nerve to, do what he did and say the things that he did, even if Karen Reed was just someone that worked in your office that had nothing to do with anything, just the way you spoke of her. And I think this is the stuff that we are goddamn pissed off about, just fed up.
Yeah. Well, just really quick, I don't know, maybe we need to talk about this, do like a follow-up crime episode on all these things, because this whole thing with the Karen Reed jury, this is just, because the judge never polled the jurors, because the jurors came to unanimous verdicts.
Yes.
Two of the 3 counts, but she didn't poll them. Usually judges will do. She just said, okay, bye. So they never. So they're saying, well, she was effectively acquitted, even though it's not on paper. They took the vote, obviously, and and
so I guess Alan Jackson, right, wrote I don't know
a motion.
I don't know what the name of the motion is, to get counts 1 and 3.
Yeah, it's
basically to say she was acquitted.
Yeah, a motion to have a verdict entered, a not guilty verdict entered on 1, which was the murder, second degree murder, and 3, which was the vehicular manslaughter, like leaving the scene, which doesn't make sense to me, because if they're split on the voluntary manslaughter, that means they think that she did it, but yet they don't think that she's guilty of the lesser included vehicular, leaving the scene of an accident type thing. And it turns out that there was a lot of confusion. They have all these affidavits from people, the jurors, they were confused about the jury forms, and they always are. They always are. And those jury verdict forms are confusing. And,
well, you've served on a jury, and you must have gotten a form, and you were the foreperson.
We had all these.
So were you confused, or were you like, oh, well, thank God I'm a lawyer. I can explain this to everybody.
Well, I wasn't confused, but the other jurors were, because the way this was a civil trial where it was a trip and fall type thing. So the very first question you have to answer, yes or no, is, was there a dangerous condition that existed on the premises? Okay, if you say yes, then you go to the next question. But if you say no, that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
There's no liability. So not everybody, 9 out of 12, which is all it takes, exactly 9 out of 12 people said, no, it was not a dangerous condition, and didn't even want to talk about it, frankly. Didn't want to hear, didn't want to hear. And then they started jumping ahead and talking about these further instructions. And it's like, well, no, you can't, if you're going to say that it's not, then this stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They didn't understand it. And it just ended up being like, okay, yes or no on this first question. And if it's 9 no's, then we're done. And it literally was. It was like a 45-minute deliberation.
Which really frustrates me, because obviously our system isn't working. I mean, I don't know. Do you think we should get rid of the jury system? I don't know if it works the way in which it was intended to work. I think that's the problem.
The problem with the jury system is that, like, sometimes it works really, really well, and sometimes it doesn't. But when it doesn't, it can have these disastrous consequences. But here's the other thing too. There's a lot of terrible judges out there too. So if your fate is in the hands of one judge who could be racist, could be, a lot of different things, could have if you just have one person judging you, there's no diversity. There's nobody to say, well, wait a minute, so.
Yeah, that's true.
That's dangerous too. I mean, it's just, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be right, but we have to have some kind of way to deal with this. And so, there are appeals, and there are, especially in criminal cases, it's, these death penalties, automatic appeal, so I don't know what to say, but it's hard. Like, people go to law school and still don't, and practice law and still get confused by these things. So how do you expect, the average people to come in and be able to understand all this? It's really hard.
Yeah. And I consider myself to have some level of intelligence, and I've been around lawyers my entire life, but I find all this stuff confusing. So, I mean, if you have no experience, or if you maybe, aren't used to being a critical thinker, that's also challenging. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the solution always is that people need to work on themselves. Like, people need to, right? Like, they need to be better people. You need to work on yourself, figure out what your biases are, right? All that kind of stuff. And that's hard. So people don't want to do it.
Well, yeah, because I think, the case that I was on, and I know this happens in all cases, people make up their minds
Yeah.
very early on, and then they look for confirmation. They look for evidence to support it. And it's just a huge case of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And I could tell when we started talking about the case that these people had their minds made up a long time ago. They had very strong feelings about the plaintiffs. They did not like them, didn't like their lawyers. They sat there for, 15 minutes of this deliberation was like criticizing the lawyers for the plaintiffs, who I thought did a pretty good job. And finally I said, it's not that easy to do this. Like, I'd like to see you get up there and do this. And it's like, fuck you.
Yeah, I love these people that criticize, other people with this stuff. It's just a little bit like then you do it.
Yeah, let's see
then
how
you do it. Yeah, you try it.
This is a month-long trial with I don't know how many witnesses, and it's like they did their presentation was good. It didn't convince these other people because these people didn't like the plaintiffs. They clearly they were like these Berkeley hippie. It was a Berkeley hippie couple, and these were people from like Livermore and Pleasanton, and it was me, this African American man, and this Asian woman were the only people who were willing to deliberate about this case.
Yeah, talk it through. Yeah.
No, everyone else was just like, nope, we're done.
What I'm really curious about, this would be interesting, is to be able, if someone's studying juries, I'm wondering how has juries and jury deliberation and the outcomes, how has it changed since social media? Because I think what's really the one thing with social media and the internet in general is it basically gave everyone a platform, and everyone started to think, oh, I have an opinion and the world needs to hear it. And my opinion is right and it's the best and it's, whatever it is. I wonder if people were better 30 years ago, 40 years ago with not making these snap judgments and not assuming things, because we are so used to in our culture be like, ugh, that's stupid. That's dumb. That's what, and there are a lot of people out there that will get on the comment section and they will comment on boom, 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 like quick judgments. Like, you're fat, you're stupid, you're this,
Well, and I think people think they know a lot about the law because they watch all these shows, or they know a lot about this or that because, they see things on. Everyone thinks they're an expert in everything, because we have access to all this information, and people get into. So people think they know a lot more than they really do. And here's the other thing too. Do you really believe these jurors when they're serving on the jury and they're deliberating? They're not going on social media and seeing anything. They're not Googling anything. They're not curious, because you're not supposed to do that. You're not. You're only supposed to consider the evidence that's presented in the courtroom. These people go home and Google stuff. So, and there's nothing you can do to control it.
I do. I think it's like anything in life where you probably have a certain percentage of the jurors that this would be me. I'm a rule follower. So I'd be like, no, I cannot look at I think there's some people that are the rule followers. I think there's probably some people that are kind of like, maybe will let themselves glance at a few things, but feel like I'm not searching for it, or I cut that conversation off. And then, I think there's probably a percentage of a certain number of them that probably did do that and feel like this is my right to do this. How dare I have to not insert my opinion. And it's you cannot be an expert in everything. No, you can't. So pick one thing and become an expert in that.
Stay in your lane.
Yes. Stay in your lane.
Yeah.
So or maybe people are screaming right now, these two bitches, they should stay in their lanes. They should be doing this. They should be doing that.
Well, I'm trying to stay in my lane.
Yeah.
You want me to talk about the law, so I'm talking about the law. This is my experience, Sorry if it's not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
But my experience. And I have done several jury trials and talked to jurors afterwards.
Mhm.
So,
I did that for Dad.
Yeah.
And for
me
your
too.
cases with Dad. Yeah.
Yes.
I've had the experience of talking to jurors. And yeah, it's really interesting because they will tell you exactly how they think about this person and that person.
Oh, yeah. They
And
don't hold back.
No, because they've been dying. They've been dying to talk about this. And trust me, I would be too. If I was on a jury, I would talk to anybody who want to talk to me. I'd be like, let me tell you what I think about this.
Yeah.
But I'm, at the same time, I'm not going to assume that I know everything. So,
Yeah.
anywho,
You were our jury consultant. For a hot minute there.
briefly, yes, when I thought I was going to go in that direction. And I guess again, it was just kind of like, I guess I didn't love the career enough to want to do what I needed to do, because when I started working with, I started becoming a therapist and got back into that world, I was willing to do the things I needed to do to become a therapist.
Mhm.
So anyway.
Well, it's probably
Yes.
a good career move, I think.
Yeah.
It's
much better for me. I think this was a much better move. But anywho.
Anyway.
All right. So wrap us up, Brooke.
Yes. Well, thank you for listening. As always, we appreciate your support. If you'd like to support the podcast, great way to do that is to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And also, if you want more of us, we have a Patreon, and it's linked in the show notes. It's, patreon.com/psychlegalpop.
Podcast. Psych Legal
Psych
Pop
Legal Pop podcast. Sorry.
We always forget to say the podcast part.
But I'm sure if you put in Psych Legal Pop,
It'll come up.
Yeah. You'll find it. You guys are smart. You can find it. You don't need me to tell you.
Yes.
So, yeah, head over there if you want more bonus content where we talk about just other stuff in pop culture. We do a bonus true crime. We do a Ask Us Anything every month, both of those. So, thanks so much for tuning in.
Yes,
And,
thank you.
See you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.